Hello, and welcome to the Built to Be Human podcast, brought to you by Functional Living Academy and Intelligent Lance Apothecary. I'm your host and guide, Liam Gallagher. As always on this podcast, I tend to talk about functional wellness and alternative approaches to health. But something I've really been on my mind lately that I wanted to talk about today, and that's the fact that we're built to observe. And what I mean by this is the brain, the conscious mind actually, was never designed for conscious thought. The conscious mind is actually designed to observe, which that information then gets pushed down to your subconscious, which processes all the information, makes sense of it, and files it. The Once that's taken place, when you find yourself in a situation that you need to make a decision, the subconscious mind presents the conscious mind the information that it needs in order to make the decision. So again, the conscious mind is designed to observe and to decide. The subconscious mind does all the processing and puts all the information in its place. We're taught as a society, as a species, we're taught things like knowledge is power, and I think therefore I am. We go to schools and they teach us how to quote unquote think. But really, all this is doing is taking away from who we are, taking away from our intuition, taking away from the human animal that we were designed to be. So I'm pretty sure most of the people in the audience has found themselves driving someday, and they're so caught up in their thoughts in their head that they either don't remember driving home or they entirely miss something. And it's not just in the car though; it's anytime. So if I'm sure you found yourself wrapped up in your own head, and you miss pretty much the entire conversation that's going on outside of you. This is a problem. The reason why it's a problem is we do best when we're able to pick up all the information in the situation that we're in so that we can know how to navigate the situation. I learned in my youth that pretty much every situation that I engage in, the answer to how to handle that situation is contained within that situation if I'm able to pick up the information. So, anytime you hear people talking about having racing thoughts, people with PTSD, you hear that they have issues where their brain is reminded of something from their past and it causes them to relive that experience. So again, all of these things are happening on a conscious level, and all of these things are really hard to get through. They're really hard to cope with, and they cause lots of problems. They cause anxiety, they cause inability to sleep and insomnia, they cause generalized tension, and it's exhausting on top of it. So anytime that I come across somebody who I notice is constantly thinking on a conscious level, I do my best to help them to alleviate this. I started, I don't know, I was probably 12, 13, maybe 14 years old when I really got heavy into meditation. I already at that age, I'm very highly intelligent, so already at that young age, I had problems with overthinking. I was attempting to reconcile what I had been taught with what my experience was, because they were completely different. They didn't line up at all. So being taught things like I think therefore I am and knowledge is power, I kind of had a tendency to attempt to process this. Instead of doing it on a subconscious level the way we were designed, it became something that I engaged with in a conscious way. Of course, it caused me all kinds of problems. Anybody who gets caught up in their thoughts knows how big of a problem being caught up in your thoughts is. So I started to do some things about it. I did, because I was so heavy into meditation, I started to meditate on the blankness. So almost like looking at the black wall or the darkness in your own mind. And I would think of it in terms of potential, and I would just observe. And I would do everything in my power not to have any conscious thought, and not even to have that little voice inside of my head speaking. And I was successful with it. Not very much, not especially not in the beginning. I'd find myself calm and meditating. And all of a sudden I'd realized that I had no thought. And of course, my little voice in my head would be like, oh, I'm doing it. I'm like, shh, you're not supposed to talk. And I'd have to start over, and I'd laugh at myself. So I did this for quite a while. I got to the point where I could not hold any thought in my head for hours on end. At this point now, I'm able to do it pretty consistently throughout my day. When you hear about meditating ceaselessly, that's actually what they're referring to. They're not actually referring to sitting down and taking deep breaths and putting yourself into a meditative state. They're talking about a frame of mind. You think of brainwave patterns and all of that, especially nowadays. And we know that when you're meditating, there's a certain brainwave pattern that's produced. So if I was able to maintain that, whether or not I was sitting down and intentionally doing it or not, was kind of my end goal. And it helped a lot. I realized all the more fully how true it is when I say things like the conscious mind is designed to observe and to make decisions. The reason why I can say this is, as I got good at eradicating conscious thought, I started to notice that there were times when I found myself either paying attention to my thoughts more or actively engaging in conscious thought. And I couldn't entirely figure out why, because I'd gotten really good at keeping that nonsense out, keeping the noise out. And what I've realized was, if I found myself in a position where there was a decision I was going to have to make, but I wasn't yet in a position to be able to make that decision, my brain would start processing everything. It would start throwing information at my conscious mind. My subconscious mind would do this, attempting to get me to make a decision so that I could move on. Since I wasn't in a position to make a decision at that time, what I decided to do was I decided to write down in a little notebook what decisions I was needing to make, just to get it off my head. And then I would write down a date that I was pretty sure I would be able to make this decision by this particular date. Of course, if it didn't happen that way, that was fine too. I would just go back to my notebook and cross out the original date and put a new one in place. But the whole point of doing this was to get it off my mind, was to tell my brain, my subconscious brain and my conscious brain, that it wasn't time for this yet. It's not that I'm going to lose track. You just got to let this go for now. And putting it down on paper in a place that I was regularly looking and checking to make sure I was keeping up with everything kept it from being a conscious issue at that point. So at this point in my life, it's very rare that I find myself having conscious thoughts. And what I mean by that is, if I have something that I'm needing to plan, like the podcast, for example, when I'm thinking of ideas for my podcast, it's not something that I'm consciously running through ideas. It's something that I come up with an idea and I hold on to that idea and I just let it kind of roll around in my brain for 4 or 5 days. And I know for a fact that my subconscious mind is processing and putting ideas together and doing all of this, and I don't have to pay attention to it consciously at all. And then when I get ready to record, most of that episode is already, I don't have to think about it. It's a matter of tapping into basically recalling the title that I came up with and the basic ideas for the talk that I'm going to give, and then I give it. So again, I give myself 4 or 5 days, sometimes 6 days to let my brain kind of come up with ideas and a plan of attack, as it were, in terms of what I'm going to speak about and the order of things that I'm going to speak about them, examples and all of that good stuff. And I really don't pay attention to it on a conscious level at all. In my day-to-day life, my conscious brain is very much already tasked with picking up information and observing and catching anything that's out of place. So I don't really have any desire or any sort of drive to engage in conscious thought. As a matter of fact, when I find myself actively engaging in conscious thought, I have a little thing that I've kind of created over the years that allows me to assess what's causing me to have this thought on a conscious level, so that I can see what I can do about it or what needs to be done so that I can move beyond it. As I've broken away from conscious thought, I've noticed I'm so much calmer. Um, I'm so much more aware. I'm so much more in the moment, in the now, as it were. And I really have found that I am more accurate in most of my decision making. I have way more information when I'm engaged in a situation that I'm kind of guiding somebody. I have way more information, is in terms of how to proceed, because I'm not consciously getting in my own way. So a handful of things that I do to kind of reinforce this. Uh, the biggest time that I find that I'm needing to pay attention to thoughts is when I'm laying down to sleep. Because that's when you're kind of shifting between consciousness and subconsciousness. I find that that's the time of the day that I tend to, um, that I have the tendency to engage with conscious thought the most, mostly because it's that time of day where you're kind of in the mindset of reviewing things, whether of the day or just in your life in general. I think it's kind of a natural tendency that we all have to do. So what I've learned to do to combat it at that time of day is I will literally direct a movie in my mind. It keeps my conscious mind engaged. It keeps it from ruminating and picking up that thought process and re-engaging with it. And it keeps my conscious mind so engaged, and I'm directing it, and I'm playing this movie, as it were, in my head. And that allows me to disengage from thought enough to be able to drift off to sleep. Um, some of the other things that I do is, if I find myself having conscious thoughts on a regular basis, I will repeat phrases. I'm not going to have this go on to me. I'm not going to allow my brain to start thinking that it has a right to decide what it's going to do. I'm the one in charge. So if I find myself in a period of time where I can't seem to shake the whole thinking thing, the conscious thinking thing, I'll introduce phrases, and I'll repeat them constantly. My mindset on doing this is, if I'm going to have something running through my mind on a conscious level, it's going to be intentional. It's going to benefit me in some way, shape, or form. And it's not just going to be my brain having its way with me because I hadn't trained it yet. So, not sure quite what else to say about this. I would love some feedback on this topic. This is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about, is the way the brain functions and how to um, gain mastery over your brain, so that it isn't having its way with you anymore. So, to quick recap, one of the quickest ways to alleviate your tendency to consciously think is, if you're in the habit of meditating, start focusing on clearing your head of all thought. There are times where I can focus on, there's a blackness when you first close your eyes and you really start to get into relaxation. There's a blackness. And instead of allowing my brain to just kind of see what appears out of the blackness, I tend to focus on the blackness itself. And that allows my brain to stay occupied, focusing on something and training it not to be so addicted to having conscious thought. A couple other things that I've done, as I've mentioned, is if I find myself needing to make a decision and it's not time to make that decision yet, I will write down a time and a date that I plan on being able to make this decision. This allows my conscious mind to let go of that, at least until the date and time that I've got written down. But again, that will buy me 3 or 5 or 7 days where I'm not actively thinking about it, and I can deal with it when it's more appropriate. And then if I find myself just completely overwhelmed by thoughts, I'll either create a movie and direct a movie in my mind's eye, or I will repeat phrases that are proactive. If I've got something going on medically, I'm like, I'm healthy. I'm healthy and whole. I'm safe and secure. any sort of phrases that will change my perception about myself while not allowing the noise, the matote, as it were, the background noise that tends to constantly go on. It stops at that point. So I have found a huge benefit from this. I'm constantly told that I'm picking up things that most people aren't even aware of. The reason why they're not aware of it is because they're stuck in their own head. So thought maybe this would be a good topic for today. It's a bit on the short side, I know. It's somewhat intentional. But please, I would love some feedback on this. Let me know what you think. Let me know if my descriptions were accurate and clear enough for you. And until next week, stay happy, stay healthy, stay curious, and stay proactive. You owe it to yourself to respect yourself. And the only way you're going to respect yourself is to start doing things for you that you benefit from. Thank you and have a great day.